Thanks very much, Elaine. Hello to everyone. I see a couple of very familiar faces. Anne-Marie, it's good to see you. And Paula there, and Helen, a couple of other people. I saw Fergus there a minute ago. Just to let you know that Paula, who's joining us, has taken some of the photographs. We're working on other projects, so she's taken some of the photographs that you'll see today. And so I'm going to share my screen now. So hopefully just bear with me now 1 second. So there you can see it. Can you see it there okay?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
Super. So because of yesterday's talk, what I figured I would do is I would start with the college chapel, and there, this picture. Some of the pictures are better than others. This is part of Pugin's plan for Maynooth College. Now, if you look at the chapel there, you'll see it's very different to the chapel that we have today. This was the plan that Pugin originally put together when he was asked to do a complete design for the entire college. And you'll see that it's unusual in the sense that you'll see the President's Arch there and St. Patrick's, the main facade. And then you'll see the chapel, but also a building behind it. Originally, what Pugin intended was that it would be a cloister. So you would be able to walk around the whole thing, much like an Oxford cloister. In fact, he did something similar in the seminary in Ushaw in the north of England, near Durham. It's actually part of the University of Durham now. So this was originally what Pugin had intended: a quadrangle, a college chapel, and then the building behind would be the Aula Maxima. Unfortunately, they couldn't afford that. They couldn't afford to build the chapel as Pugin wanted it done. So eventually, I suppose the person behind the building of the current chapel was Russell. And what Russell wanted was a chapel that would intake the entire college community. So, so he wanted a chapel that would seat at least 500 to 600 students. And when it happened that the Pugin design wasn't accepted, Russell went to J.J. McCarthy. Now, J.J. McCarthy was the first professor of ecclesiastical architecture in the Catholic University, this new Catholic University. And he was invited to submit designs, and then this was the one that was chosen. Now, if you look at the picture closely, you'll see the chapel, obviously, you'll see the spire, and then you'll see a building jutting out at the back, which is not built. And again, that was intended to be the Aula Maxima, but in the end, that wasn't built either. Now, so originally, as I said, from about 1950 or 1858, Pugin had desired to build this chapel. Pugin's son had a couple of times asked about, you know, fulfilling and completing his father's designs, because basically his father hadn't been paid for the design that had been submitted. There was a bit of argy-bargy between the Pugins and the college on a couple of occasions. And interestingly enough, there was a bit of argy-bargy between McCarthy's son and the college also, because McCarthy's son wasn't asked to complete the chapel once his father had died. 1877, Russell suffered a debilitating fall. I'll talk a little bit about Charles Russell in a minute, and he was succeeded by William Walsh in 1880 and then Robert Brown in 1885. Now, Robert Brown was the one who is responsible for the decoration of the chapel. So in 1881, it was completed, in that the shell of the building was completed. This is an interesting photograph for a number of reasons. First of all, you'd see these fabulous handball alleys that were there, but it was taken about 1902 or 1903, and you can see the top half of the spire is much newer than the bottom half, the tower as it were. So it gives an indication that it was done sort of not long after, the photograph was taken not long after the chapel was, or the spire was completed. So this is the chapel as it appeared in Healy's history. In 1895, for the centennial of the college, John Healy, who had been a member of staff, then the Bishop of Clonfert, and then eventually Archbishop of Tuam, had written the Healy's history. Now, there's a number of copies of it in the library, and it's a massive work. But you'll notice that the chapel is without the spire. So that's the spire and the tower. So that was as it appeared in 1895. This is Charles Russell. Charles Russell was probably one of the greatest presidents of Maynooth in many respects, because he was prepared to push and push and push for the college chapel and for the advancement of the college. He was very, very friendly with a wide variety of Victorians at the time. This is his, I was nearly going to say his son, but obviously not. This is his nephew, Charles Russell, who became Lord Chief Justice of England, first Roman Catholic to serve as Lord Chief Justice since the Reformation. And just on an aside, Robert Brown, who was the president who undertook the internal sort of decoration and completion of the chapel, was the uncle of, if any of you are from Cork or Cloyne, he was eventually Bishop of Cloyne, but he was also the uncle of the famous Father Brown, who took the photographs of the Titanic. So here's a timeline of the internals. And the thing about this, I suppose, talk is the fact that we can look at some of the details of the chapel in sort of a closer detail than perhaps you would be able to do if you were there in the chapel with me. So we look at the details: the floor, the stalls, the strings and corbels. I'll explain those. The Stations of the Cross, the stained glass windows, the ceiling, and then the sanctuary, and finally the Lady Chapel. Hopefully we'll have enough time. So Robert Brown appointed in 1885. He then appointed William Hague as the interior architect. Now, the interesting thing about Hague was that Hague had completed a number of McCarthy's projects already, namely the cathedral in Monaghan, St. McCarthan's, had been started by McCarthy, but was actually finished by Hague. There was a couple of instances like that. First ceremonies took place in 1890, ordinations on June 24th. And it was decided then on June 24th of the following year that the chapel would be consecrated. Very much spoken about in the media. We have accounts from the various newspapers of the consecration of the college chapel. The thing about it was that the college chapel was, how did they build it? They built it from the pennies of the poor. They had national collections, and not only national collections here in Ireland, but also all around the world, where there were Irish priests and where there were Maynooth men. So, you know, I would say without a shadow of a doubt that for all of you listening today, probably some or all of your ancestors paid for this chapel. Because whether you're in Australia indeed or wherever in the world, probably some of your ancestors paid for this chapel. Anyway, centennial of the college in 1895, and then the tower was completed with the spire, the tower being the straight bit and the spire being the pointy bit, in 1902. The reredos, the new reredos, which we'll come to in a while, was constructed by money left over from the will of Gerard Malloy, who was the rector of the Catholic University. And it was completed and consecrated by Daniel Mannix. The Lady Chapel wasn't completed until 1914, and then the ceiling of the Lady Chapel wasn't completed till 1927, probably the last thing that was done in the thing. So you can see the span of, you know, between the first mootings of the chapel in the 1850s up to that. So 75 or maybe 80 years by the time the chapel was actually finished. So these are the doors as you would go in. Interestingly enough, and not a lot of people know this, well, people know it because I constantly go on about it, is the fact that the doors are on back to front. Where you see that it says Domus Dei Porta Coeli, which means House of God, Gates of Heaven. They actually should be facing outwards so that you're going into the space. So anyway, when you walk in the college chapel, there is always the wow factor. And as you can see it's just a stunning piece of architecture. It's a stunning piece of proportion as well, in terms of how it's laid out, its height and its length. And I have those details for you as we go along. So let's look at, this is looking it down in the other direction. And this is one of Paula's photographs. So, and the interesting thing, the first time I saw this chapel was in 1983, when I became a seminarian in Maynooth. It never looked this good when I was a seminarian. It was a massive renovation was taking place before the bicentennial in 1995. So a lot of the work that was done is credited to that, and the lighting and the stadium lighting and all the rest of it. This is interesting. This is a letter from Brown to, from Haig to Brown, which is in the college archive, which is dealing with work being done by the Monan family. Now, the Monan family did the woodwork in the sacristy. It was often thought that they were the ones who did the work in the college chapel itself, but actually it wasn't. It was a firm of Connolly from Dublin who did that. But the interesting thing about it is, if you go into the archive, which I've been lucky to do, there is voluminous correspondence between Brown and Haig and Brown, back and forward. In the much as we bang away an email, every day or 2-3 times a day, how many of you sent, half a dozen emails already today? They were sending letters, and because there was a post a couple of times a day, so there was often 2 and 3 letters between Brown and Haig in the one day. So, on the floor on the way in, you'll see this mosaic pattern. Originally, Brown wanted marble, but they were boys on a budget, so they couldn't. So Burke Brothers of Paris and London did this, and it was a mosaic. And this is what it says: Laudate pueri Dominum, salite Deo, salite quoniam rex omnis Deo, salite sapienter. And you can see what it means. It gives an indication of there's 2 essential themes that run through the decoration of the chapel. One is the praise of God, Laus Deo. This angel is up in the sanctuary, that's why I've put her there. And the other is the preparation of seminarians for the priesthood. The decoration in the chapel is also quite stunning. If you look at it, it would hark back to the types of colors and patterns and all the rest of it, and stencil work and that, are very, very similar to those of Pugin. But they are very typical of that 19th century, sort of late 19th century design of, those geometric patterns and the particular colors that they use, those greens and blues and ochres and dark reds and stuff like that. So those are some of the details. And those are some more. This is a detail, the panel there on the left is a detail from the sanctuary, and then this is one of the crosses which is just directly outside the door of the chapel, and then one of the little details from the strings, which I'll come to a little later. And you'll see some of the work on the doors as well. Although they were, as I said, boys on a budget, and they were very, very tight in terms of what this was going to cost, because not only was the president answerable to the academic council in everything that he spent, but he was also answerable to the bishops, who were very, very tight when it came to money. Probably because, for the most part, it was their congregations and their parishioners and members of the diocese who were actually paying for it. There's another beautiful detail there of some plasterwork, or stonework rather, in just over the door into the sacristy. This actually is where it comes from. This is some of Haig's drawings, which are in the college archive, and this is for the sacristy door and the tribune, which is above it, which is it was a kind of an area where priests who were maybe infirm could come and hear the ceremonies and hear mass if they weren't able to come to the chapel itself. And then the woodwork. I suppose one of the great glories is the actual woodwork itself. And then you can see it was done by Messrs. Connolly and Son of Dominic Street. And this comes from an account of the chapel from the National Press in 1891. Corish in his book talks about one of the senior professors who were there in his time telling him that it was actually the Monans who did it, because he was a first year when they were actually doing it, which is fascinating to think that, the professor stretched back that far. Anyway, the details, it's done in American oak, which any woodworker would tell you is a very, very hard wood to carve. These are the ends of the just as you go out the door, the four evangelists, and you see St. John the eagle, you'll see St. Mark the bull, or St. Luke the bull, and you'll see St. Matthew the man there. And then you have these statues which are at the back of the stalls, either side of the coats of arms of the various Irish dioceses, and at the time of the building of the chapel. And a figure like that who holds a church is usually the founder of a monastery or the founder of a diocese. Who it is, I'm not overly sure. You'll see as well behind him, you'll see that flora, and then behind the coats of arms, you'll see more plant life, as it were. And then you'll see it on these. These are the finials. And there are over 100 of these in the chapel, and every one of them is different. And they're, as I said, of the flora being, the plant life. And the idea was, coming from the Canticle of Daniel, that it was, let every creature, let everything in creation praise the Lord, including the flora. This is Haig's plan for the layout of the chapel, and you can see the stalls there on the left hand side at the back of the church, right through along. Again, available in the college archives. Now, the corbels are these little pieces that jut out, which carry the weight of the ceiling. And the corbels in this case are have angels which are carrying various symbols, and this particular symbol is a dalmatic. The symbols are associated with the various minor and major orders that a seminarian would go through as he made his way towards priesthood and to the episcopate. So this is the dalmatic, and underneath it you'll see that word Dalmatica Justitiae, and there's the quotation. They come from the various ceremonies associated with the institution of these. So you've got a porter, acolyte, exorcist, subdeacon, deacon, priest, and bishops, for 4 minor and 4 major. And this is one of the minor orders, which is subdeacon, and it's the dalmatic there. You can see it, and that's, as I said. And then on either side, I didn't have very good photographs. You'll see a line of carving. If you can just see above the angel, you'll see a bird, and over to the left-hand side, just about to go out of the picture, is actually a monkey. So what they have is, in this, they have all these animals. You can just see on the right-hand side of these strings, this line of carving. Now, the strings are very important in that they're a medieval device which separates earth from heaven. And there's a number of different sort of groups of strings in the college chapel, here in the main body of the church, and also in the sanctuary, and also in the side chapels. They were said to have come from the temple in Jerusalem, and the great temple of Solomon, and normally they would encapsulate grapes and wheat, obviously for the sacrifice, Melchizedek, and obviously then later the Eucharist. But in this case, often the flowers, decorations, people, whatever it may be. Then the Stations of the Cross. Now, these were done by the artist Westlake. Now, Westlake had an ecclesiastical business in London, and basically what he did was he painted them on canvas, and then they were brought to Ireland and they were glued to the wall. And then another artist called Mannix came and did the gilding of the background, the halos, and things like that, to give them an appearance of fresco. But also, if you look at them, they have the kind of pre-Raphaelite, now Westlake was by no means a pre-Raphaelite painter, but they have that pre-Raphaelite realistic kind of look about them. And you can see them there. I just took 3 of them, as it were. And he falls under the cross. He meets Simon Cyrene, helps him, and then he's nailed to the cross. Apparently, the college authorities didn't like the amount of gold that Mannix used. This was the painter, Robert Mannix, and they thought it was a bit too bling. Now, the stained glass windows. The stained glass windows are done by 3 particular artisans. What originally they just decided that for the stained glass windows they would have a complete design. Originally they thought about the life of Christ, the life of St. Patrick, And then they thought maybe the life of the Irish saints. You know, every window had a different Irish saint, and eventually they stuck with the idea of the life of Christ, which was interesting because the windows were done by different artists at different times. They were bought according to when the college could afford them or when people paid for them. And so these were the three. Meyer of Munich, famous stained glass studio in Munich. Basically, it was like the it was like the IKEA catalog. You looked up whatever stained glass window you wanted. You picked it. You gave them dimensions, and the window arrived, if you like, in the post. But that doesn't undermine the fact that they were very fine windows. Lavers and Westlake, the same Westlake again, and then Cox Buckley, who did quite amount of work on the chapel. The reason I have this little monument here, it was a little discovery that I made a number of years ago. This is the Nelsons, Elizabeth and James Nelson, who are from Leixlip, Cool Drina in Leixlip. They actually paid for 2 of the windows. And I happened to be in Glasnevin once and happened to see their grave. So they were members of the emerging sort of Catholic middle classes, or Catholic squirearchy, if you like. And as you can see, the windows look as good from the outside as they do from the inside. The window on the left-hand side is actually taken from my study up in St. Patrick's. These are 2 of the windows. This one is the birth of Jesus. You'll see the window in its entirety, and above it you'll see a small little, what's called a sex foil. That small little window has the Old Testament precedent for the New Testament event that's portrayed in the main body of the window. Usually the bottom 3, the base panels, are the the coat of arms of whomever paid for them, or the donor, or whatever it is. And this is, I was just saying before we went online, that I'm dying to get a drone into the chapel because I want to see some of the detail. You see just there at the feet of the Pharaoh's daughter, there's some writing there, which obviously I can't read. So this particular window is the birth of Jesus, and the Old Testament precedent is the life of Moses, which was typographically, or iconographically, I should say, normally the relationship between the Old Testament and New Testament often was the life of Moses and the life of Jesus, which you'll see in the Sistine Chapel. Here, they mixed it up a bit. So this is, for instance, the Holy Family at Nazareth, and above it you have the Holy Family of Tobit. Let's move on. This is the rose window, which is over the organ, and it depicts in the middle Christ, the Pantocrator, Christ in judgment, with the angels and the archangels, the apostles, and surrounded with St. Peter and St. Paul on the bottom. This window was paid by 2 college professors, Dennis Gargan, who later became president or vice president, and Edward Malloy, who, as I said, went on to the Catholic University afterwards. Obviously, they paid them more in those days than they do now, so that's how they could afford to pay for a window. This is the ceiling. The ceiling is a great heavenly procession, firstly of angels carrying instruments of the Passion, and then various saints. And there are 3 orders of saints. You have saints, pastoral saints, missionary saints, and monastic saints. So you've got here St. Patrick, obviously pastoral. You've got Columbanus, missionary. You've got St. Columba, obviously monastic. This one below there is one of my favorites. It's the kiss, Judas, portraying Jesus, and the angel covers its face as it happens. The words around it are the words of the 3 great canticles of the Magnificat, the Magnificat, the Benedictus, and the Te Deum. So here we have in that lower one, Miserere Nostri Domini, Miserere Nostri, which comes from the Te Deum. Have mercy on us, Lord, have mercy. And then, blessed qui habitant in domo tua Domine. Blessed are those who dwell in your house, O Lord. So forever singing your praise. Again, which comes from the Te Deum. Now, the interesting thing, this is by Westlake, as I mentioned, and the idea was that this is the heavenly choirs, which are joining with the seminarians who are singing at the bottom. And if you like, from the psalmist, that my prayer rise before you like incense, and they rise and join with the heavenly choirs. This is interesting. This is Westlake's ceiling from St. Joseph's Catholic Church in Highgate in London. So you can see similarities between our window and their window as such. Then in the sanctuary, I know I'm running very rapidly out of time, you have the altar of the reredos. Now this reredos, which is the canopy behind the altar as such, was the one that was paid for by Malloy. The one that had been there originally was smaller, more squat, and you can actually see it in Healy's history. But the bigger one, which was more ornate and more in keeping almost with the design of the chapel, actually blocks the picture behind it, which is of St. Patrick. The altar at the front is, I'll come to in a minute, but the altar just behind it you can see, which is made of Carrara marble, has a beautiful carving of the Last Supper, the Da Vinci Last Supper. This is this originally started out life as an altar which was on the cloister. The ambo, which you can see beside it, is was its reredos, and it was created as an ambo. And when they needed an altar after the Second Vatican Council, rather than sort of messing with the chapel as it were, they brought in an altar, and this is it. And the carving is actually by Petrus de Whippleslaer, which is a sculpture from Bruges. And you can actually, his work is quite extensive. A whole family of sculptors who were there were in Belgium, as I said, 1897. So it was, I feel like, reordered and reduced, reused, and recycled when they needed an altar after Second Vatican Council. This is behind. You see the reredos there, and behind the cross you'll see these that little detail there, which is the angels, which held a monstrance, which when Eucharistic adoration happened, in particular the 40 hours adoration, the monstrance was placed there. There you have one of the statues, which are the 4 statues, patrons of the Archdiocese of Ireland, and this is in Jarlath. Those of you who know the legend of Jarlath, he's there with a broken wheel. Like I said, Mannix consecrated this reredos, and he became Coadjutor Archbishop of Melbourne and was ordained to the College Chapel in 1912, left it then. The panels and the apse are the 6 principal, if you like, patrons of Ireland. There you see St. Patrick preaching to the King. Interestingly, behind the guy with the harp, you'll see a building, which is actually a church in Rome, San Stefano Rotondo, which built along the dimensions of the New Jerusalem in the book of Revelation. And it was actually where one of Brian Boru's nephews is buried in Rome. The ceiling in the apse has the apostles and the patriarchs and the evangelists there, and the apostles with the instruments of their passion. And this is the Lady Chapel. This is a beautiful photograph that Paula took. And the Lady Chapel was finished last. The problem about the Lady Chapel was, and all the chapels, was for a long time they couldn't get there was constantly seeping of water in, and they couldn't get the water. So eventually, almost 100 years after the chapel was built, they finally worked out the technology to stop the water coming in through the chapel. The 5 smaller chapels, which were used for priests for saying mass in the days before concelebration. And as I said, the decoration, you'll see this angel here, which is by the studio of Harry Clarke. Now, it's probably not by Harry Clarke himself, it's by one of his artists, or indeed one of his apprentices, but there's these 5 little panels of angels with various musical instruments, and the decoration that you see on the ceiling was done by Clarke Studios. Again, Clarke's, were ecclesiastical suppliers. One of the many companies that grew up sort of after Catholic emancipation as churches were being built. This was one of the big problems about the building of the College Chapel in Maynooth, because at the time, bishops and parish priests were trying to build or rebuild churches all over Ireland after Catholic emancipation. They were trying to establish the Catholic University and all the rest of it. So, you know, the money for a chapel like this was, you know, limited enough. The organ, which there's been 4 organs, if you like, in the case that you see. First, some Stahlhut, which was on the recommendation of Beverungi, who was the first professor of music, and then Henry Willis of London after the First World War, Kenneth Jones from Wicklow in the 70s, and then a huge rebuild and a brand new organ from the Rafati brothers in Padua, which was done only a couple of years ago. There's Haig's design for the organ case. And the organ has, and this is some of the construction of the present organ, including, you'll see the picture on the bottom left-hand side, Monsignor Hugh Connolly, who was president. It has always been a tradition that the donor of an organ gets their name on the pipes, or the person who, not the donor, the person who gave them the job, gets their name on the largest of all the pipes in the organ. And here it is, as I said, from the front, looking splendid. I hope you get a chance to come along. Oh, so these are some of the visitors that have been in the chapel itself. That's Sisi, the Empress of Austria, who came to the college on 2 occasions, gave us a stunning statue of St. George killing the dragon and vestments. Prince Rainier and Princess Grace, who came on a number of occasions in the 60s when they were staying in Carton. Their Royal Highness the King and Queen of Spain, Pope St. John Paul II, St. John Henry Newman, and St. Teresa of Calcutta, all who have visited the college chapel. Dimensions: 188 feet long, which is actually not as long as it looks. It looks much longer because of the way the seats are constructed. It's 40 feet tall and 71 feet, 40 feet wide and 71 feet tall, obviously. It cost 25,000. That's what they were told they could spend, and that's what they did. The interiors cost 9,000, which is phenomenal when you think about it. And then the tower and spire, 14,000. So a total of in around the 50, somewhere between 6.5 million. Actually, people would put it at a lot higher than that, somewhere between 20 and 25 million today's money. Now, if you go on to the St. Patrick's College Maynooth YouTube page, you'll actually you'll see my talk that I gave in the college chapel itself. So you'll have a chance to go in it. But I sincerely hope that in future you'll get a chance to visit the chapel, you know, at some stage once all this sort of ghastliness is over, I suppose. All right, Elaine, back to you. I know I'm over the time.
Thanks very much. No, that's grand. We've just had lots of interaction and comments. I think it'd be nice to read some of them out. So I'll hand you over to David just to maybe let you see, because you won't have seen them when you were speaking, to see some of the comments, and then we can open the floor. There's some claps coming up there, which is lovely.
Thank you.
People really enjoying it. So David, do you want to just quickly run through some of the comments that are there, and then we'll open the floor to anybody who might like to ask a question?
Sure. So there was lots of praise for the photos and the information, and I'll read a few of them. There was one comment that perhaps you'd like to elaborate on. So we'll start off with, there was one that said, so easy to take in the intricacy of the beautiful hand painting and carving for granted. Let's see. Yes, really lovely. Reminds me of the time going to art history lectures when I was in college.
That's very kind of you. Thank you very much.
So Ron said this. He said, my ears perked up at the mention of Daniel Mannix, a mighty figure in early 20th century Australian history, especially with regard to Australia's history during the Great War. And it speaks to the strong connection that used to exist between the Australian and Irish Catholic communities.
Absolutely. There's actually, Ron, there's a statue, or there's a bust of Mannix in the professor's dining room. The other thing about Mannix was, yes, he went to Melbourne in 1913, but he didn't die until I think the 70s. He outlived at least 2 of his successors. and all of his auxiliary bishops. He was a very powerful figure. Powerful figure, I suppose, the wrong word for it, especially with today's kind of thing. But he was very powerful and very vocal. Mannix was also he was very opposed to conscription, and there was a fabulous. There was Barbara McCormick from the library gave this amazing sort of exhibition. And Mannix was very much against, because there was talk of conscripting the seminary community into the First World War, and Mannix would have been very much opposed to that. I think he was very much opposed to conscription in general, and but in the sense of the building up of the church in Australia, very, 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 very prominent, very, very important, a very important legacy. And I've been to the cathedral in Melbourne, and there's a beautiful bronze frieze in memorial to him there. Yes.
I'll read a couple more of the comments, and there are a couple more questions. I used to go to mass here on Sunday when I was in college a long time ago. Lovely and peaceful.
Yeah, it is a beautiful, peaceful chapel. Sadly, we don't use it on a regular basis. Well, we use it on a regular basis, but when I was a seminarian in the 80s, it was used every Sunday for the community mass. It was used on Saturday evening for evening prayer and benediction and night prayer. The Dom Casey, any of you who are old enough who would have known the professor of chemistry, Michael Casey, he used to lead night prayer and benediction, to which everyone was. And the interesting thing was, in those days, normally you had your assigned seat in the college chapel, but on Saturday evening you were able to sit wherever you wanted. I always found myself sitting opposite the Station of the Cross. That was my favorite. And you found people sitting, in particular places that they had a particular affinity with, I suppose, in terms of the decoration, and in terms of because I've forgotten her name. The whole thing about religious iconography is that religious art has to be decorative, it has to be didactic, it has to be prophetic, and it has to be the fourth one, which I can't remember offhand. Didactic in the sense that it teaches, and also devotional. That's the fourth one. So those four elements of religious art has to be those, and I think the college chapel combines it beautifully in many respects.
A couple people asked that once things normalize, if it's possible to get a tour, or if there's a moment when it's open.
Yeah, if my details are on Maynooth College Chapel, or not Maynooth College Chapel website, Maynooth College website, and normally in the normal circumstances, the chapel is open a couple of days a week, usually in the mornings. And if I'm on campus, I'm happy to show people around. Always willing to show people around the college chapel. I've shown individuals. But the last group actually I had was the General Assembly of the United Nations. So if you'd like to, they were on campus earlier, just before the lockdown, and I managed to show them around, which was a great honor for me, because as I said to them, I never thought I would be addressing the General Assembly of the United Nations. But they were there with a former student, an alumnus of the college, who's now ambassador to the United Nations. So yeah, there is possible getting tours. There are tours available, as I said, like that, and also I'm happy to do it as well.
Fabulous. Martin Downs asks, did I recognize ghastly as coming from the "when this ghastly rush is over" phrase attributed to someone we both may have known?
Yes, indeed. And as he would say himself, I am sorry, but there really is no need to be ugly. I presume you're talking about Ronan Martin, are you? Yes. The late Father Ronan Drury, who was professor of homiletics, and who was in the college for a third of the college's history. He sadly died a couple of years ago, and we still miss him. He actually, the pulpit, which I didn't have a photograph, the pulpit was a place where every Good Friday he used to deliver his Stations of the Cross, which were just very, very powerful. powerful. He was a brilliant preacher. He was a great teacher. He was a great friend, and he's still missed. Yes, he would use that word regularly. Yes, indeed, Martin. Yes. I think I saw a question there. Were donations for the building made in addition to Peter's Pence? There was nothing Peter's Pence. No, Peter's Pence wouldn't have been. They wouldn't have got money from Peter's Pence. It would have been just from the pennies of the poor, really, from national collections. If you remember at the time, Daniel O'Connell was collecting. For the Catholic, the I can't remember its name. I'm not a historian. He would have had his collection, so there would have been collections that Catholics would have contributed to, and this was one. Maynooth was in its past they were the Irish people were very proud of Maynooth, and the fact that even during towards the end of the penal times we managed to establish this college. And I remember at the time of the Maynooth grant there were riots in London against Maynooth because of the Maynooth grant. So Irish people were very, very proud of Maynooth and what Maynooth achieved and all the rest of it.
Thanks very much for all of the questions there. I'm just going to hand you over to Helen now, our Deputy Librarian.
Thank you very much, Elaine. John Paul, thank you so much on all our behalfs. That was truly amazing.
You're very welcome.
Last year, I think it was, John Paul entertained another group to a tour of the chapel. It wasn't as prestigious as the UN, but it was the Dublin Erasmus Librarians group.
That's right, I remember that, yes.
From all across Europe, and we were just bowled over with that face-to-face tour or attending the chapel, and I didn't think really you could do better today, but today has been fantastic too. And one of the wonderful things about the visuals is, of course, it allows us to see in detail the details of the building. So I'm certainly looking forward to revisiting the chapel and also revisiting the presentation. So thank you so much for.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
I'd also like to, because this is the last day, just recall the presentations over the last 3 days, which really were absolutely amazing on each of the 3 days. We're really thrilled here in the library about how well this has gone. On Tuesday, we had Stephen Seaman, and many of you were here for the wonderful grounds. The next day we had Pat Watson, who told us about the history of the college, and today it's been John Paul Sheridan with this tremendous talk on the college chapel, and it's certainly given us a window to Maynooth University and St. Patrick's College and our beautiful buildings. So thank you for that, all three speakers. I'd also like to thank Elaine Bean, our events manager here. We've managed very successfully to move to online for some events, and indeed we have had far more people over the last 3 days than we might have had face-to-face. But that doesn't happen without a lot of work. So thanks for all the work that went behind the scenes to make today happen, Elaine. And also, thank you to David Reinhardt, who's doing technical assistance with Elaine today. So well done. And thanks very much to all you people who've come and given up your lunchtime over the past 3 days. And can I just say, Elaine will be in touch with some further information and links. The talks have been recorded over the past 3 days. And also it's an opportunity, if you want to give her some informal feedback, and if you're happy for us to use it, we'll be doing social media and possibly something for the Liffey Champion, and we would just put down something like Martin Maynooth. We don't need to use the full details of your name. Not that I'm sure anybody's going to be saying something they don't want to be associated with. It's all been so good. And also, if you want to be on our mailing list for future events, Culture Night is coming up in September. Please let Elaine know that. So I think that's me, and thanks again everybody for a great Heritage Week.